powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, this is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Inside the Birds was with us all week in Arizona, and now they are back and ready to break this game down as the Eagles lose Super Bowl 57, 38-35. So many stories in the game. Of course, the call, the field, the fumble, the punt return. A historic day, by the way, for Jalen Hurts. He was the second player in Super Bowl history to rush for 3 touchdowns in a game. He's the second quarterback ever with 3 rushing touchdowns in a playoff game. He's the 4th quarterback to pass for 300 yards and run 3 rushing touchdowns in a game, regular season or postseason ever. He's the 5th quarterback to lead his team in rushing in the Super Bowl. He certainly did everything he could to try to help the Philadelphia Eagles win that game. Jeff Mosher, if we said on any day last week that, hey, the Eagles would have had a better game from Hurts than the Chiefs got from Mahomes. Mahomes under 200 yards passing. We would have said probably the Eagles win that game. So in the end, with the effort Hurts has, coupled with, yes, an MVP effort, but under 200 yards from Patrick Mahomes, what was it in that game that the Eagles were not able to overcome?
Wow. Interesting question. What were they not able to overcome? Partly their own mistakes, Mike. I mean, they had a fumble that gave them a touchdown. They had a bad punt that set them up for an easy touchdown. So that's 14 points right there that the Eagles hand-delivered to the Chiefs, which, to be honest with you, I don't even have to stop. You lose a 3-point game, you gave them 14 points, right? I mean, that even if you want to say they shouldn't have given up a touchdown after the long punt return, they're definitely getting a field goal out of that. So that's 10 points. So 10 points alone on those mistakes right there. And as we talked about many times leading up to the Super Bowl, tight games, things like special teams and turnovers and little stuff that is hard to factor into the pregame analysis because you just don't know when it's going to come or how it's going to come. That stuff always comes back to haunt you. You know, I mean, I know, and we'll talk about it, Jonathan Gannon's under a lot of fire today and, you know, deservedly so for some part, but I kind of look at some of their breakdowns and say, you know, is that his fault or is it the player's fault?
That's what I wanted.
A little bit of both. That's
what I want to get into here because Gannon, I think, definitely needs to be questioned on what happened in that second half. Why did Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy seem to really have him off balance? Was he wrong personnel, wrong scheme? What's the mix of blame here, I guess?
Well, that's a great question. So there's really 2 drives, right? The Chiefs had 2 long drives. Well, the one short one is not, to me, you know, Jonathan Gannon did a terrible job. It was 3 plays, 5 yards after the long punt return. The opening drive was 70 yards. And then the last drive that kind of sealed it was a 12-play, 62-yard drive. The Chiefs did a really good job of doing a couple of different things. One, they ran the ball. And, you know, I don't think a lot of people would have expected of Andy Reid to have stuck with the run as much as he did. So do you look at Jonathan Gannon and say, bad job by you not playing the run very well when everybody in the world thought Andy Reid was going to pass more? You know, you can certainly at least criticize him for adjustments there. It's not that he didn't blitz enough because I think I've seen the statistics and I haven't, you know, watched all 22, but it sounds like Jonathan Gannon blitzed a little bit more than he normally does.
32%. I think they said it was the 4th most blitzes that he had in any game this season.
Right. Well, there's your answer to Eagles fans who say blitz more because it's not about blitzing more. And in fact, he may have blitzed too much because the second touchdown, which the second give me touchdown where they just walked into a Sky Moore, he throws a 0 blitz at the Chiefs. And when you're in 0 blitz, that means whoever's in coverage is in man coverage. And Avonte Maddox was about as slow to get to Sky Moore as you can possibly be. The same way Darius Slay followed Kadarius Toney inside and then did not get back out there for the first give me touchdown. So is that Jonathan Gannon or is that 2 guys who just did a very bad job of man coverage with a lot of motion. I'll blame Gannon if I find out that they didn't practice against a whole lot of motion or different schematic looks. But I have a hard time thinking that when you face Andy Reid, you're not doing things in practice to try to prepare for motion and sort of misdirection.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to hear this. We had Sal on in the last hour, and he said, Mike, they set 5, 32% of the time. It just wasn't getting home. Now, he followed it up by saying, well, if you don't get home with 5, you got to send 6, and that I don't agree with. I mean, you got blitzed by sending 5. If you would have sent more, they would have lost the game by 3 touchdowns.
Possibly. And I think they did send 6 on that Sky Moore touchdown, right? That was 4 rush, and both linebackers came up the A gaps. And, what that did was that gave Sky Moore, who sort of motioned back inside, looked like he was going to be maybe a decoy or a ball carrier. Then he just looped back out to the outside. Patrick Mahomes knew that whole area was going to be uncovered because they were blitzing. And Avonte Maddox was, again, late. So there's a lot that went wrong defensively. I'm not trying to absolve Jonathan Gannon because I do think you have to take a step back and look at it and say every single time this man has faced a really good quarterback or a really good offensive scheme, almost every single time that offensive scheme or quarterback has fared well against his team. So there's something fundamentally not right. And it goes back to the conversation I had with you last week, on Radio Row, whereas people describe Steve Spagnuolo's defense or Spagnuolo as a, quote, pain in the ass to go against because you don't know what you're getting all the time. He's going to confuse you. You got to prepare for a bunch of different things. Nobody says that about Jonathan Gannon, even when his defense is playing great. It's not a pain because you kind of know what he's going to be doing. It's an execution style defense. You're going to either execute or you're not. So the guesswork for the quarterback isn't really the issue. It's just having the time and the protection to be able to do what you want to do. And Patrick Mahomes had the time and protection to do what he wanted to do.
Jeff Mosher, Football for Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. Yeah, because, look, you mentioned the defense, and everybody's looking at John Gannon. They didn't make the adjustments. They didn't do enough. They got out-coached. I think Andy Reid, let's give him credit. I don't know if it's so much you got out-coached as you got beat by a really good coach. I mean, Gannon, here's the thing. The defense is predicated on, hey, if you're going to have a 10-play, 9-play, 12-play drive, you're eventually going to make a mistake. You're going to fumble. You're going to go off sides. You're going to throw an interception. We're going to get a sack. The problem was that never came, and the Chiefs had multiple long drives. So your philosophy that has worked for 20 games this year did not work in this particular game. Everything played out. 9-play drive, 10-play drive. Where's the mistake? It never happened.
Right. I think if Jonathan Gannon's defense and Jonathan Gannon himself didn't have this track record of just not getting the job done so often against better quarterbacks and offenses in this league, then you would look at this game differently. You would look at it and say, man, I mean, it's not Jonathan Gannon's fault that Reddick and Sweat didn't get sacks. They've been getting sacks all year. They were well blocked. Or it's not Jonathan Gannon's fault that Slay and Maddox couldn't get there in time because they ordinarily do. But again, you look at it in the micro and you say, well, you know what? These quarterbacks and these receivers and these offenses, they know what they want to do and they get it done.
It's like anything, Jeff, in baseball. Like, this pitcher gets out of it all the time, and then analytics came in. It's like, well, not after the 5th inning he doesn't, so we're going to take him out. It's like, hey, I know Reddick is going to win, which takes us to the next thing. Reddick's comments after the game, a lot of comments after the game. That field was a major problem, was it not?
It was a major problem. It's not an excuse because both teams have to deal with it. And I think it affects both teams differently. I feel like it did impact the Eagles' pass rush because they have really fast speed pass rushers, and you saw those guys slipping. But, there are certain players on the Chiefs who, like Kadarius Toney, for example, who are also fast. And there were times I saw them slipping as well. They just happen to make more plays. So, but I think it's a travesty.
Well, for
the NFL.
What the Eagles' game plan is with, Reddick said, look, I had my guy beat multiple times, and then I would get kind of pushed, and my feet would slide out from under me. He's like, when you watch the tape, that'll play out. That I saw him, like Baldy had his breakdown. I saw a bunch of times where his feet are just sliding out from under him. Same with Josh Sweat. Sweat's got Brown beat multiple times. He just slips, and a lot of it happened in the painted areas of the field, but the whole field was this brand new turf. Now, both sides had complained.
Yes.
It seemed, though, that the Eagles were affected more. Why were the Eagles having to change cleats so much? It didn't seem that they were at least highlighting during the broadcast that the Chiefs were having the same issues. Mailata said it felt like we were playing in a water park. I mean, these are terrible things to hear after a game of this magnitude, especially when you're talking about – right, especially most when you're talking about a team that generally gets pressure, gets to the quarterback, and that was being neutralized.
Yeah. Now, again, it's got to, if Jordan Mailata felt like he was playing in a water park, that means Orlando Brown must have felt that way too. And Andrew Wiley must have felt that way too. And yet they were still able to keep pressure off. And yet Jalen was under some pressure throughout the day. Now, a lot of that is because Spagnuolo would send more than the Eagles had to block. But honestly, there were times where he looked like he was going to and didn't. And once again, the Eagles allowed a couple of free rushers on 4-man rushes. That cannot happen. That's something that Jeff Stoutland has to look at in the offseason. I joked on the podcast, Stoutland University's got to have an 8 a.m. class on free rushers and not allowing those to happen. That really is communication and knowing what your blitzes are and how to block, you're going to communicate to be on the same page.
Yeah, I want to get your thoughts on the call, obviously, and whether or not the call affects the game and your, thought on how much that call played into the outcome of the game. One play, but it's a pretty big one. So what say you?
Yeah, I mean, as a viewer, I don't like seeing calls like that all the time at that part. But at the same point, I do think it was a penalty. It was a foul. Most of the contact, you can see it in two different spots. Most of it was on the initial release from the line of scrimmage. You're allowed to contact somebody within 5-yard cushion, but not hold them that way within 5 yards. The first thing I thought of was that while it might seem unfair at the timing, this happened. And people say, well, just be consistent. This happened last year in the Super Bowl when Logan Wilson got called on the same type of quote unquote ticky-tack hold against Cooper Kupp on a third down play that wound up setting up the go-ahead touchdown for the Rams. So referees do consistently call this play in the final minutes of a game. It sucks that it happens, but it happens. Bradbury admitted that he did it. Nobody likes to see a game end that way, but I can't sit here and confidently tell you that the Chiefs aren't going to score if that's not a hold. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Does he catch up to that ball?
Well, it's third down.
Right, but do they go for on fourth? Do they kick the field goal? That's still 3 points. There's
if they kick the field goal, if they kick the field goal at that spot, at least Philadelphia has however much time is left when that play happens to go down the field, and we get to see an epic ending. Whether they score or not, we'll never know. My biggest problem is I agree. Sure, you want to call that a penalty. The precedent was set early in that game that you were not calling that a penalty. The play on Bradbury early in the game on third down on Juju Smith-Schuster is throwing his hands up in the air. He's crying up and down looking for a call. No call. On that play, Juju Smith-Schuster had no reaction because I don't think he thought it was that big of a deal. Not to mention, he didn't think he was catching that ball. It was so far over his head, you can make an argument that the ball should have been deemed uncatchable.
Right, and I want to go back. I really want the All-22 to come out soon. Maybe it'll be out soon, if not already. Part of me thinks that Mahomes motioned immediately to the receiver in the corner there, and I wonder if part of him threw the ball that way, just basically throw the ball to the end zone because he saw the contact early. So that would make the whole uncatchable thing not as important because that's what a smart quarterback does. He sees the contact, he just throws the ball in the air, and he knows that the referee's going to call it.
Right. I mean, because he was the only guy on the field, it seemed like, that was saying that's a hold. That's a hold because Juju Smith-Schuster had no reaction. He didn't have – every wide receiver on every play begs for a call. He didn't turn around and ask for anything there. I think he conceded that ball was just thrown over my head, and I wasn't getting to it there because he had 2 or 3 steps on Bradbury after the hold.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I get your argument could be, well, maybe he has 4 or 5 steps and then does get to that ball. Who knows?
Who knows,
I think that's why Patrick threw it there. He saw the contact.
The play that I hate most that's killing me today, it's 2nd and 11, and they call a timeout to prevent the clock, the play clock running down, the delay of the game. And you call timeout and you play for the field goal anyway. You might as well just take the 5-yard loss. If you're going to play for the field goal was 33 yards. Now you have a 38-yard field goal. What's the difference? Why call the timeout if you're not going to – if you're going to come out of that timeout, you better come up with a play to get that first down. They throw to Gainwell underneath for 5 yards, and they kick a 33-yard field goal. Well, now you're out of timeouts, and that ended up costing them.
Yeah, but I don't think the play call was supposed to go to Gainwell in that regard. I think that play got – and again, I want to check the all 22 when it comes out. I think they had a different read on that play, but there was pressure, and Jalen had no other choice.
Possibly, but same thing applies. If you were willing to kick the field goal there anyway, it's a 38-yard field goal, worst case scenario. You're still getting 3 points. To me, the timeout is more important than the 5 yards. In today's game, 5 yards might as well be 2 yards. So I'm not burning a timeout for 5 yards.
Right. I mean, you bring up a good point. You do have to wonder, did he have 3rd and 4th down in mind when he did it? Like, he's still thinking, even if I don't get the full yardage, will I get close enough to go for on 4th down and keep it going?
And then they didn't. They kick a field goal.
Right.
Because they ended up kicking the field goal.
That's because it was an incomplete pass, and they were still, it was 11 yards, right?
No. They got a pass complete to Gainwell.
Right. They hit Gainwell.
For 5.
It was 4th and 6, right?
It was 2nd and 11 when they called timeout.
Right, and then it was a 5-yard pass to Gainwell on 3rd and 11. Then it was 4th and 6.
Yes.
If they get 7 yards, which is not first down, but it's 4th and 4, does that change the equation of them going for it?
Maybe they're at
it possibly does.
Right. Well, if it's 4th and 4, they would be at the 13-yard line. Do they go for it? Maybe, but same thing applies. If you don't call timeout and take a 5-yard loss and you throw, instead of a 5-yard pass, a 9-yard pass, you're in the same situation.
Right.
You know, and if you were willing,
that wasn't great management. I agree with you.
If you're willing to kick the field goal there anyway, kick the field goal from 5 yards deeper. It's not like you went from a 50 to a 55-yarder. You went from a 33 to a 38 in the worst case scenario, and then you end up losing the timeout. That kills them.
Well, ordinarily it does. It didn't kill them because there just wasn't enough time left when they got the ball. I don't know if that one extra play that they could have got would have made a much of a difference.
All right, I
agree with you. It was not great. I thought there were a couple. I thought in general that the play call took too long to get in on a number of occasions.
They took the 5-yard penalty earlier in a game in the situation. All right, I know you got to run. We'll talk more. The off season's here. Tough one to swallow, 38-35. Jeff Mosher, listen to Inside the Birds podcast for their thoughts on the game last night. And when Jeff's back on Wednesday, he will have seen the all 22, and we can get his thoughts on that. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Mike.